failed prophetic chart used by William Miller in 1843 and endorsed by Ellen White, thus Ellen White becoming a part of this predicting herself. Uh, when Rushdie 2 made a response to a video I made pertaining to Ellen White predicting the return of Christ and becoming a false prophet herself, I had shown several statements in that video that Ellen White had made pertaining to this chart. And Rushdie 2 took a word that Ellen White used, judgment, and made the statement that she was talking about investigative judgment. So what he has done now is put his fellow SDA members into a position where they cannot even defend him anymore, because investigative judgment was never a part of this original chart. Apparently he doesn't know the history of Seventh-day Adventist or know how to explain his own doctrines. If he did, he would have known that investigative judgment was never a part of this original chart to begin with. This chart that was formulated by William Miller and endorsed by Ellen White had to do with the world ending. It had nothing to do with investigative judgment. In fact, investigative judgment was not even taught by Seventh-day Adventist organization, or the pioneers that is, until 1857. But investigative judgment was never a part of this chart to begin with. You will look down there in the corner and you will see the dates of 1843. That is when they thought Jesus was first going to come back. And remember now what Ellen White said. She endorsed this chart by saying she saw that God's hand was in this chart and all the figures and everything were as they should be. But then she added, but God's hand covered a mistake. And the mistake that Ellen White said that God's hand covered was the date of 1843. And when God's hand was removed, Ellen White says, we saw that the date then was 1844. So again, she is predicting the return of Jesus Christ now in 1844. And Rushdie is trying to say, no, she's talking about investigative judgment and stuff, which was never a part of this chart to begin with. So his members can't come out and defend him now by saying, oh, he had a slip of the tongue. He really didn't mean to say investigative judgment. They can't defend him for two reasons. One, I didn't say anything in my video about investigative judgment. And for him to look at the word judgment and put investigative judgment in there, he had to consciously think of the word investigative, and make it a part of that chart, which it never was originally a part of this chart. So he is the one that had to think about that to add it to it. The second reason they can't defend him is this. If they say, well, it was a slip of the tongue, he really didn't mean to say that, then okay, let's remove investigative judgment out of it, and it goes right back to the point I was making to begin with, that Ellen White was indeed predicting the return of Christ in 1843 and in 1844. Either way, they can't defend what Rushdie 2 has said now, because either way they're making Ellen White a false prophetess, or saying that they've changed their writings or changed their doctrines or whatever it may be, because investigative judgment was never a part of this chart. The early pioneers held the shut door policy up to 1851, which meant for between 1844 and 1851 no one was going to be saved. The door of salvation was shut. Of course, they couldn't just keep holding that forever because Jesus hadn't come back. And Ellen White had already said in 1850, get ready. Well, we've had years of learning. We've only now got a few months to learn, and that dealt with her date setting for 1851. So 1851 comes and goes, and rather than admitting they had made a mistake, their sinful pride would not allow them to get off the date setting of the return of Jesus Christ. And they continued looking for answers as to why they were wrong. They were wrong because they're trying to predict the return of Christ. If they'd have dropped it, fine, move on about your business. But they didn't do that. People like Joseph Bates and others began trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Why hadn't Jesus come back? And they began talking about, not in the terms of investigative judgment, but something along those lines. And James White and Ellen White would not buy into this. And that is why, again, in 1856, she's still predicting the return of Jesus Christ at a conference in Battle Creek, Michigan, where she made a statement in 1856 at a conference there that some at that conference would be food for worms, and others would be alive at the return of Christ. So in 1856, she's still predicting the return of Jesus Christ. again, because she isn't even thinking about investigative judgment at this time. And they tried to get around this by saying, well, this was conditional prophecy. Come on. Seventh-day Adventists might buy into that, but logical people don't. There is no conditions in that prophecy whatsoever. She was predicting the return of Jesus Christ. They're trying to cover it up just like they have all of our other failed predictions. Getting back to this, though. So then, again, they're still talking about this, what's going wrong. Finally, in 1857, James and Ellen White began talking about investigative judgment. And as far as I know, James White is the first one to actually use the term investigative judgment. And now this slowly begins to become part of the writings of Ellen White. In fact, The Great Controversy is nothing more than a book written by a charismatic woman who had nothing more than visions for doctrines that had already been formulated. This was no vision from God about wrong interpretation of the Bible. You don't get visions from God about the return of Jesus Christ or this investigative judgment where Jesus didn't enter into the most holy place until 1844. All she was a woman of convenience. So when they needed an endorsement from their spirit of prophecy, they would formulate the doctrine, say, here, Ellen, yep, that's right, and she'd have a vision about it. That's pretty much what it was. But so investigative judgment was never a part of the original chart to begin with. Had nothing whatsoever to do with it. But he's introduced something else by doing this, though, that I want to show Seventh-day Adventist members as well. You see down here in the right-hand corner, three angels. The three angels' message out of Revelation chapter 14 was part of this chart. Again, the return of Jesus Christ. Today they preach a different three angels message than Ellen White originally taught. And that's what I want to show since Rush Dye's opened this up. I want to show those members who never know this how they have now changed the three angel message for something that it originally never was. Until then, this has been Golly saying, God bless.